the Victorian International Container Terminal. And there's been a development there which Patrick will describe, which has made our Port of Melbourne a facility of a world first, actually, and a world leading capacity, I could put it in that word. So Patrick, over to you. You can share screen and do as you wish. Thanks, Patrick.
Great, thanks, Simon. Just want to make sure everyone can see my presentation.
I think everybody's okay with that. Yes, Robert's giving a thumbs up, and I think lovely. Well, welcome to our meeting. Lovely to see you. Peter Anderson is one of Australia's foremost experts in transport and logistics, with a lifelong career working in the business of freight movement for private businesses, and more recently, Victoria's peak transport industry representative group. As Chief Executive Officer of the Victorian Transport Association, a role he's held since 2014, Peter is the voice of over 800 transport and logistics operators in Victoria, with a focus on enhancing the productivity, safety, workforce development and sustainability of the industry through leadership and advocacy. Peter was appointed the VTA CEO, serving as a board member since, since 2007. His involvement with the VTA dates back to 1994, serving on numerous committees and as honorary chair of the VTA's General Freight Committee and its container group. Coming from a transport family, Peter has lived and breathed freight and logistics his whole life. He's held management positions since 1983, becoming only the second Chief Executive Officer of the Scott Group of companies, where he drove major cultural change and business improvements. Away from work, Peter is an avid sailor, having completed Sydney and Melbourne to Hobart yacht races and competing for Olympic selection. He's been a member of the Sandringham Yacht Club for 40 years and is also an avid golfer. Peter is actively involved with children's education, musical and sporting interests, and is a life member of his local junior football club. Peter has been married to his wife of over 30 years, Deborah, and has two children, Samantha and Scott. Peter, welcome again to our meeting, and we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Well, that's about it then, Simon. You got the full bio there. I don't know where you got that one from. I thought we got rid of those.
That's secret.
Anyway, it just about wraps up my background. I'm an operator, not an academic, and my experiences in the transport logistics industry have been made through mistake and getting things right, learning from the mistakes and getting things right. So please, at any time, take notes, ask me questions. Otherwise I'll just keep going for a while. But some of the things I may say may be controversial. I take it when we don't have any reporters in the room, but you're more than welcome to say, well, Peter Anderson said this, but I don't agree. And I'm quite happy for you to do that. I'm quite happy to discuss any specific issue that may be contentious or not agreeable to other people's perspectives, based on the fact that it's all got to come down to logic and what's balanced and what's best. So with that, I'll flick over to share screen. If I can get this right. Where is it? Here we go. How's that, Jeff? Did I do the right thing?
Thanks. So. Yeah. Good. Well done, Peter.
From the beginning. Come on, you can do it. There we go.
Very good. Very good.
So let me just start by giving you a bit of a background about the association. The association is the largest member-based employer association in Australia in transport. We started back in 1902. They called the Master Carriers Association, went through to the Victorian Road Transport Association, and then to broaden our scope, changed our name to the Victorian Transport Association some 35 years ago. As you can see there, some examples of transport, road transport through the ages, but we try to actually engage with rail, sea and air as well as road. Of course, road we're predominant, but it's about intermodal connectivity in everything we do, and how do we make our supply chains more efficient, more productive, and safer. So they're the three elements that we're looking for in our industry. But how big is our industry? There's about 1 million trucks in Australia. Those numbers aren't necessarily completely accurate. It's probably about, and they're a little bit older now too. So we're probably about 1.1, 1.2 million vehicles, but the percentages are about right. So you'll see there a heavy reliance on heavy rigid and light rigid. And that's in the context of the fact that, especially along the eastern seaboard in Australia, the freight task is 5% interstate, 15% intrastate, and 80% less than 100 kilometres from the point of departure. And most people don't realise that. They think trucking and road transport is all about blue singlets and stubby shorts and elbows out the window, travelling long distances, spending weeks away from home, and the drivers are halfway between being a drug addict or a criminal. And that's an image upon which the industry doesn't relish, but unfortunately, because of a number of systemic issues within the industry, is one that the public generally consider and regard our industry. It hurts me greatly at different places, and I defend it vehemently at parties and dinners when people start to talk negatively about the nature and the culture within the industry itself. But it's important to note that the industry has a predominance of smaller type of vehicles. And can I say that a truck is a vehicle greater than 4.5 tonne gross vehicle mass, GVM. So legally, a truck is anything greater than 4.5 tonne gross vehicle mass. That's when it's loaded. Anything below that is a commercial vehicle. And we have 6 times more commercial vehicles than we have light vehicles on the roads. So there are 6 times more vans and budget rented trucks and smaller vehicles on the road than there are normal freight vehicles. Doesn't mean they don't carry freight. It just means that there's a task there specifically for them to do. But when you talk about articulated vehicles, there are semi-trailers. There's semi-trailers, there's B-doubles, there's high productivity freight vehicles, there's A-doubles, and now we're even talking about B-triples. And of course, in the northern parts of Australia, we have road trains, whether they be doubles, triples, or quads, or even specialised vehicles bigger than that again. So that's just to give you a bit of an idea about the size of the industry, keeping in mind that every truck needs a driver. In Victoria, we have about 165,000 heavy vehicle drivers. We have about 450,000 people in Victoria with a heavy vehicle licence. And the licensing is something I'll talk to about a bit later on, which is a major issue within our industry. But the biggest thing the biggest encounter people have with trucks is when they pull up next to them at a set of lights, and all they see with a semi-trailer pulling up next to them or a B-double, they see steel and some dirt and the wheels and the chassis, but they don't see the eyes of the driver. They don't connect, and they have a great deal of angst about the size of the vehicle compared to their own vehicle. And can I just say, rightfully so, because physics is physics. Physics is a fact. And it's important that we understand that the heavy vehicle has a place to play in our society. And I'll be talking about community amenity and versus economic productivity a bit later. But traffic and congestion is of course the enemy for supply chain productivity. And keeping in mind that trucks are just an element of a supply chain. It was interesting when COVID first came in last March, and everybody decided to head down to the supermarket to pull out their 12 and 24 pack of toilet paper. And all of a sudden we didn't have any toilet paper, and everybody's decrying the fact that we're not going to have toilet paper. Europe solved that by having bidets, but the thing is that we've got two manufacturing plants in Australia of toilet paper, one in Sydney and one in Tantaluma in South Australia, and that facility down past Mount Gambier there that makes toilet paper every day probably has about 20 acres of 20 rack high warehousing, all run by robots, full of toilet paper. We have enough toilet paper in that warehouse alone for about 6 months of all of Australia. It's just amazing. And we pump out tons of it every day. We used to take 400 pallets, we used to deliver 400 pallets of toilet paper a day in Perth in a job we had. So the point I'm trying to make there is the fact that we couldn't, the problem with the supply chain was that we just couldn't get it onto the shelves fast enough. We had plenty of it, but the way it was going out the door, the fact that people would fill up their cars, fill up their boots full of toilet paper, which they probably still haven't used yet, meant that, well, they certainly haven't gone down and bought any more since last March, meant that the supply chain couldn't meet the demand of what was walking out the door. It wasn't that we didn't have the product, it's just we couldn't meet the demand. So supply chain efficiency is what we're looking for in our industry all the time. So then how do we then gain that? Well, part of that is my role is to engage with the public and the industry and with government and lobby and advocate towards those decision makers that can actually help us build that efficiency and build that productivity. We have a number of different plans. We have Infrastructure Victoria recently came into being, and they produced a 30-year strategy. They've just released, last week, they've just released their next phase. Every 5 years, they've got to release a new phase of their 30-year strategy. And there's 95 points on that about how we can make our community operate in a far more effective and manageable way based on the growth predictions that we have. But you'll notice a list of reports there. The Eddington Transport Report was a fantastic report. A plan for Melbourne's growth areas was even better. Planning policies for Melbourne, metropolitan Melbourne, but the one I really want to draw your attention to, and I'd like you to write it down and actually probably Google it, it's still on the internet, is the last one, the Plan for General Development 1928. It's a fantastic document. It was put together by people who really knew and understood and felt about what they were talking about, really knew what they were talking about. They talked about a ring road in Melbourne. They talked about a ring railroad around Melbourne, all things that we're talking about now. But they also talked about widths of streets, creating boulevards, which they did do. We have 4 major boulevards: St Kilda Road, Sydney Road, Footscray Road and Williamstown Road. The major boulevards in Melbourne, and they virtually came out of this plan. So it was a fantastic plan put together by a group of individuals. It took them over a year to put it together, and yet we've seemed to have forgotten it. Hopefully you can't hear that tapping noise.
No.
I've got a builder in the.
Yeah, slightly.
I've got a builder. I might go and ask him to settle down. Anyway, tell me if it gets too annoying. Estimated volumes. Estimated volumes show that that we travel a lot in Victoria. That's Victoria, and they're one year's accumulated travel numbers. So 39.6 billion tonnes of freight are carried. Doesn't mean it's all individual freight. We carry the freight 3 or 4 or 5 times in its process, if not more. So, but the real issue there is the fact that you can see how important getting the transport paradigms and the transport infrastructure is to everybody, not just certain groups. We have some things happening for us which are fantastic. The Rail Crossing Removal Authority is one of the better authorities in Victoria. The value to the community hasn't really been emphasised enough. The ability to be able to get around our community without the rail crossings is a transforming boom for us. It really is. And I'm not just talking about trucks, I'm talking about everybody. They help the local community. And of course, Sydney did it back in the mid-20s. They did it a long time ago, 100 years ago, nearly 100 years ago. And I think Sydney only has about 6 or 8 rail crossings now in this metropolitan area. And of course, that's where we need to get to as well. The regional rail and road upgrades, of course, the Murray Basin Rail, we spent $440 million trying to upgrade the rail network from Mildura through to the Port of Geelong. We got as far as Ararat, and we've run out of money. So we've been able to upgrade their sleepers to be able to take heavier trains and faster trains. But we haven't been able to complete the project, and that's been a real impost on the export of grain this year. So what we have this year is we usually move about 4 million tonne of grain within Victoria. This year we've had a bumper crop. We've got about 5 million tonne, and it's usually split 50-50 between road and rail to be taken to the export markets. But this year, with the downgrade of the rail volume or rail capacity due to the issues with upgrading the lines and not being able to complete that project, means that rail can only take about 1 million tonne. So when you take the 1 million tonne off the 5 million tonne, it means that the road is not just carrying 2 million tonne; it's actually carrying 4 million tonne this year. And what the authorities have failed to realise, is I'm going to have to go and tell them to shut up.
It's getting a little bit intrusive, Peter.
Okay, I'll go and ask him to settle down. Can you talk for a second, Simon?
Sure. It's a pretty fascinating development, isn't it, gents? The projects that are underway. Wasn't it interesting to hear that original plan for general development was done in 1928, and we're now putting it in place. Gee, there's some pretty amazing stuff. I'll get my camera to work. Okay. Does anybody have a question that we can put to Peter?
Simon, they're on. Everyone's on mute at the moment.
Yeah, I understood that. That's fine. But if they wanted to unmute and ask a question, we can ask him again of Peter when he was. Oh, here he is. We'll keep going, Pete.
Okay. Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry. That's better. So what I wanted to do is highlight an issue we've got in Victoria right now, which is the fact that we've got a bumper crop of grain. We can't get it to market. The ships are still sitting in Geelong. We're trying to load them as quickly as we can. They've got over 50 trucks in queues every day because of the volume of trucks, and we just can't get the volume there. The farmers are going crazy because they've got all this grain they can't move, and we can't get the authorities to do things like give exemptions to A-doubles to be able to build up the capacity to be able to meet the demand. So we've got regulation and a lack of empathy within the institutional authorities to actually understand what the problems are and respond and react accordingly. So that'll be to the detriment of Victoria's GDP, because it'll mean we won't get as much grain away as quickly as what we thought we wanted to. Tullamarine Freeway, widening of Tullamarine was a great project. It was interesting. It was done in 4 stages. The first 3 stages by Transurban, and they finished that in about 4 or 5 months. The last stage was the airport stage owned by the government. That took over 1.5 years. That's indicative of where we sit with the type of perspective that people have on some of these things. The bridge upgrades around the port are imperative for our industry. We need to get the bigger trucks in. And this is a point that I really like to make, is that the bigger the truck, the safer the truck. The bigger the truck, the newer the truck. There are more safety features in a $300,000 truck than there are in a $300,000 car. So there's fewer emissions, the driver's better trained, it has a softer impact on the road, and it's able to decrease the amount of trips by being a larger truck. But unfortunately, our communities have this attitude towards trucks as being an impost on their community amenity, whereby they don't want, not just don't want bigger trucks, they don't want trucks on the road at all. Each council from 2004 has to have a traffic integration plan, a transport management plan. I've read about 30 out of the 79, and only one of them ever mentions trucks, and that was the city of Maribyrnong, where it said in writing that it is looking to get trucks off its roads. And I don't understand. If we don't want clothing, if we don't want toilet paper, if we don't want food, just get the trucks off the road. Just ban the trucks, not a problem. But I'd really like to know which ones people don't want to see on their roads. Which trucks don't they want? Is it the garbage truck? Is it the fuel truck? Is it the food truck? Which trucks don't they really want? So the thing is that down the port, we need to upgrade the bridges to get the bigger trucks through, so we have fewer trips, so we have a lesser of an impact on the community, less of an impact on the environment, and we're able to still meet the demands that are there based on the standard of living we all enjoy. The last one there is the Westgate Tunnel project. And that's an indicative project of exactly what I'm talking about. The inner west want to get trucks off their roads, and rightfully so. I have over 10,000 truck movements down around about half a dozen roads every day, and the port is open 24/7, and that's another problem that we have when we try and combine community amenity and economic productivity. But the Westgate Tunnel project will be a boon for the industry until something goes wrong. So if we have a truck breakdown or a fire, or somebody gets out of their car, or something happens inside the tunnel, you've got to have an alternate route. And I don't believe the authorities are banking on or planning to put an alternate route in. So we're worried that we'll have all the roads blocked in the inner west. And when we do have a catastrophe, we'll actually block the port. And that will cost a lot, not just in money, but in the way we live, because then there'll be products that won't be getting to market at all, because they just won't be coming into the state. So I'll keep going. So it is about community amenity and economic productivity. How do we make the two of them blend? So the community would like to see a reduction of through truck movements on residential streets. In other words, everybody likes the trucks servicing their own community, but you have to drive from one community to another to get to another. And I'll give you an example of that in a minute. So, and of course, it's not just about the extra cost to the operator. It's actually about how do we better manage trucks on our roads. Not how do we exclude them, how do we curfew them, how do we ban them, but how do we better manage them? And the VTA is constantly coming up with solutions for different lawmakers and institutions to try and help them. So we have curfew exemptions for modern vehicles. We've been pushing that, for example. We believe that technology will improve the enforcement of regulation. One of those regulations is fatigue management, and we have a new process now called electronic work diaries that are applied to fatigue management, and the industry lives underneath a regulation called the Heavy Vehicle National Law, which sits separately to normal road law. So not only do we have road law as an industry, but we also have the Heavy Vehicle National Law. And we have a lot of prescribed processes upon which we must perform our normal tasks under those mandates. We have a thing called chain of responsibility, for example, where the responsible officers, owners and responsible officers of companies can be held legally liable should there be a misdemeanor by a driver or part of their operation. So those sort of fears sit within the management of transport companies all the time, and of course they drive good behaviour and they drive accountability too. So local road improvements on preferred routes. It's all about how do we put trucks on the right roads, and we have a number of actions that we could talk about there. Toll reductions for affected trucks. So what we're looking to, for example, a lot of trucks work 24/7, especially around the port, and all they do is change the drivers over every 12 hours. So we're looking for some sort of recognition of those type of movements. Access certification and is certainly part of being able to better manage trucks. You'll see streets with signs that says no truck over 4 tonne, for example. That could be expanded into other areas in other ways. And of course, alternative fuels are a major part of our industry going forward. As diesel fuel development diminishes, we have alternate fuels such as electricity and fuel cells powered by hydrogen. And the industry is very much in the belief that hydrogen, it will be far more effective than electricity. So we're not looking forward to seeing electric trucks on the road. Electric vans, not a problem. Smaller delivery vehicles maybe, but the larger trucks, they need a payload, and their weight to power ratios don't come about with electricity, not without tons and tons of batteries. So we see hydrogen as a real answer for us rather than electricity. So I'd love to discuss that a bit further if anybody'd like to. So what we did in the inner west, we had a problem with the Westgate Tunnel when it was first announced back in 2016, 2017, and that was that with this 10,000 truck movements through the inner west today, the residents were up in arms, had created had built up an anti-truck movement called the Maribyrnong Truck Action Group, who historically had been fighting the Victorian Transport Association publicly and to the table bashing stage and staring and glaring. I came onto the scene and thought, well, we can be a bit more mature than this. We could do something a bit better. So we devised a plan, which we eventually sold to the Maribyrnong Truck Action Group, MTAG, that would mean that the curfews that were currently stood within that group, within that area, to stop trucks moving at night, would be lessened if we had a truck that had greater emissions controls, and would be lengthened, the curfew period would be lengthened for those that didn't. So we'd put some commercial leverage into the industry, on the industry becoming accountable for its emissions, and getting greater access, greater productivity if they went towards that solution, and would be penalised with their older trucks, with old Betsy, 20 years old brakes, old emissions, old gearboxes. And poor old Betsy would be penalised, and she wouldn't be able to travel through that area as often, keeping in mind that you have to drive through the inner west from the west to get through to the port. This was after we established that MTAG's greatest issue was emissions. It was about emissions. It wasn't about trucks weren't spearing off into footpaths full of children. There weren't the accidents. It was basically the emission standards. And an engine emission standard called Euro 5, which has been in the industry for over 10 years, was the one that we selected. And of course, Euro 6 is the next standard, the better standard again going forward. And we said if the industry was willing to transform and transition into Euro 5, would you allow us greater access street to streets? And of course, we came to an agreement, which was fantastic. They said yes, it was a win-win for us and a win-win for them. And it was a fantastic exercise. Unfortunately, we had an institutionalised bureaucracy at that time called VicRoads that decided that they didn't want to have to make any changes. They didn't want to have to be brought into this. And they ignored a direct instruction from the roads minister at the time that said, we want this implemented. Now, they made up some issues. They created some other conversations. They brought other people into the process after we'd already agreed to all of this, and then delayed it for another year and a half, and then came out and said, no, we can't put this process into place. So for us, it was a sad moment, because we thought we'd worked hard, we'd thrashed it out, we'd worked out the pros and cons and the intricacies and the things that wouldn't harm the transport industry, but would still give benefit back to the community. And we'd work through all these things, some very late nights and some very tepid conversations, whereby we thought we had a great solution. We thought it was a world's first to have industry and community come together and agree on a solution. But the bureaucracy defeated us in the end. I'll move on from there. So another mantra that we have is about clearways, not curfews. So how do we get the traffic to flow down certain roads? Not down every road, not clearways everywhere, but we don't want these blanket curfews that give nothing back to the community except, oh, hang on, a good night's sleep for one person once every now and then. A good example of that was when the Labor government came into power back in 2014, November 2014. Part of their election promise, and I must give this to Daniel Andrews, that first term in office, he fulfilled nearly every election promise that he'd put forward upon which he got elected. We all may have differing views right now, but at that particular time, that first 3 to 4 year stint was fairly active in terms of what he'd promised in his election process leading up to being elected. And that government, but there were some issues there that we weren't happy with, and one of them was the curfews on Rosanna Road at night. And what you have in front of you there is a map of northeast Victoria. That road across the top is the M80, and you'll see Rosanna Road coming down and a few other, Edgar Road and a few others coming down from the north. But they were the main access roads that you get to the east of Melbourne. Keeping in mind that we have the largest fruit and vegetable market in Epping, just north of that black line. We have the largest fruit and vegetable market in the southern hemisphere. So we were having interstate trucks, we were having local trucks. The fruit and veggie people couldn't get to their stores in Frankston and Dandenong without having to go all the way around to Tullamarine Airport, all the way back down the M80, over the bridge and back in under the tunnels and back into Dandenong and Frankston that way. Had to go right around Melbourne because of these curfews. And it was interesting because I went to all the public hearings and I didn't say much. I sat there with a collar and tie on and listened to the councillors and listened to the people. And as it turned out, the real action behind this being put into place was one person that lived at the bottom of the hill, whose husband was woken up every night by the engine brake being applied by a semi-trailer coming down a hill trying to slow up without wearing his brakes out by using his engine brakes. Now, once we got to that point, I was able to, in a public meeting, ask this woman, well, what about if we didn't have, I said, not all trucks have engine brakes. I said, rigid trucks have normal braking. In fact, their braking is even better than on cars in some cases. But I said, if we didn't have the noise of the engine brakes, would it be all right for those quieter trucks to travel down Rosanna Road? And of course, once we'd established what the real issue was, we were able to get to the nub of it. And she was quite happy for that to happen, because I was trying to explain to them exactly the impost that she was putting on people. I said that we've got people that run a fruit and veggie store in Frankston that now have to spend an extra 2 hours a day travelling to and from the market that they wouldn't normally have had to spend had they been able to drive down that Rosanna Road at night. That's 2 hours away from their family. It's 2 hours time that they don't have to manage their lives because your husband gets woken up by not their truck. So what we're able to do is find a compromise of any truck less than 16.5 tonne gross vehicle mass, which is basically a rigid, would be allowed to travel down Rosanna Road at night, but any of the semi-trailers and any of those larger trucks with air brakes would not be able to travel down Rosanna Road. So we created a compromise, which was fantastic. So we didn't win everything. We weren't looking to try and get every truck down Rosanna Road, but what we wanted was some common sense to prevail in the better management of our network, of our infrastructure, so at least some sector gets some productivity and efficiency without being unsafe. So that was a great win for common sense. And that's the sort of thing we're looking for in the community all the time. The other one was the North East Link. We campaigned heavily for the North East Link. We don't necessarily agree with the path that they've taken, but we need to stop trucks having to go through the tunnels. We believe we can get 30 to 40% less heavy vehicles travelling through the tunnels in Melbourne by going around the outside with the North East Link. It's a vital freight link for us. I talked briefly about the Port of Melbourne access. There again, we need to rearrange the port infrastructure. It's pushed up into Swanson Dock, and it's sad the way that it's evolved over a period of time. Melbourne was built around a centralised model, and of course the rail and the road and the ports were all into the major population centre, going back 150, 200 years. However, that's now starting to change, and we're trying to diversify and move away from having the port located where it is. We've got a facility called Webb Dock, which is on the other side of the bridge, which is fantastic. The only issue there is that we're looking to create a new precinct with 14 high rises, 88,000 people, and we want to encourage bike riding. So it means our major access road into Webb Dock, which is meant to be our new port away from and moving away from Swanson Dock, where we are at the moment, has no rail access, and they're looking to shut the roads down to create bike paths. So once again, we have high productivity freight vehicles, which are double articulated, 30 to 32 metres long, 77-tonne gross vehicle mass, carrying two 40-foot containers or four 20-foot containers, travelling down the road at 40 or 50 kilometres an hour with nothing more than a white line separating a cyclist. Now, I don't care who's at fault. If a cyclist and a high productivity freight vehicle come together, the cyclist always loses. I don't care who's at fault. Truck went over the line, cyclist went over the line. It's not about who owns the road. It's the fact that somebody dies. In fact, I'm giving evidence on exactly the same sort of thing in about a month's time with the coroner. But the real issue for me is the fact that we want to develop this Fisherman's Bend precinct to make money, not to facilitate a better form of process, just to make money. So we've got all these high rises going in, overlooking the port, over the port facilities, which they won't like, because the lights will be on 24/7. There'll be trucks coming and going 24/7. And the residents who have spent $1 million on an apartment are going to be asking the local council to shut the port down at night because they don't like the noise and they can't sleep. Yet we're quite happy to build these high rises in these areas, in these industrial areas, and then turn around and say we'll kick the industrial area out. It's interesting that we've got a cement wharf in there, and the infrastructure associated with that has got conveyors going over the road. It has major silos. It's where all our cement that goes into concrete and batching plants, it all comes into there by ship from South Australia, basically. And the local community want it to move. Well, I haven't got a problem with it moving. Where would they like it to go? Keeping in mind that we're talking about wharfage, we're talking about land-based support. It's just it's fantastic. If there was a bigger picture in mind, I wouldn't have a problem, but there isn't. So the conflict we have is the fact that we have developers and planners that don't quite understand the need for the industries that are located there that can't go anywhere else, and how are we going to better manage the transport infrastructure. At the moment, it's a losing battle because the forces are in the political correctness of we want bikes and prams to be pushed down the street. But unfortunately, they're going to be pushed down the street with truck after truck after truck taking containers often on the wharf, because that's the demand of the people, the broader community. But the local community are going to say, we don't want it. And we're getting that already. So there's another battleground for us there going on. But there are some good things happening. So Vic Roads have engaged with us some time ago on a thing called dynamic speed trial. And there's a section of the M1 of the Monash Freeway, the 10-kilometre section, which has a high degree of technology implanted along its way. So it measures weight and distance of axles and speed and wind and temperature, and it can tell you what sort of vehicle it's travelling and whether it's changing lane. And they do a lot of study in that 10-kilometre section to see what can happen if they change conditions and rules. And one of them was to slow the trucks down, slow the trucks down to 90 kilometres an hour, while the cars were still allowed to do 100. When they came to me originally, I said it won't work, and they said, "Oh, we'll give it a try anyway," and it didn't work. So within 4 months, they'd realised that their crash statistics had accelerated, because what was happening was that the trucks were slowing down when they were told to, but the cars weren't, and the cars were running into the back of the trucks. So they stopped that pretty quickly, but it was a good exercise that they had to work their way through to really understand the dynamics of the trucks and the effect that they have on the broader traffic, especially in a multi-lane freeway. It's interesting, in a multi-lane freeway, you can be doing 43 kilometres an hour and everything travels well. You can be travelling at 40 kilometres an hour and everything, you can be travelling at 50 kilometres an hour and everything's clogged up. And it has a lot to do with people braking. There are still people driving with 2 feet. In other words, 1 foot in the accelerator and 1 foot in the brake. Unfortunately, that's a habit that creates nothing but confusion with people that are on the road, and it means that a concertina effect happens on these freeways with people braking when there's actually no real reason to brake. And that creates a lot of congestion on our freeways. So that's just an illustration of the section of road that's there. The dynamic speed trials. The other one was taking the trucks out of the right-hand lane, which we agree with on multi-lane freeways. So there's no reason for a truck to be travelling on the outside lane of a 3, 4 or 5 lane freeway. Keep them inside the other lanes, and let the cars that need to go through, let them go through, and motorcycles. One of the things we don't agree with is Geelong Road. So at the moment, Geelong Road is a 3 and 2 lane freeway that is banned trucks on the outside lane, which means trucks get stuck behind tourists in 2 lanes, and they're stuck behind that vehicle all the way. And of course, people get upset because they're right up their backside and all that sort of thing. But if they're you've got to understand these trucks travel up and down Geelong Road 3, 4, 5 times a day. So, and they want to get home. So if they spend an extra 2 hours travelling up and down Geelong Road because somebody in their one trip only wants to do 80 and 100, what it means is that that's 2 hours they don't get with their family. So they're trying to get home to be with their family, but they're being held up because the law says they can't pass people in the outside lane. And what we'd like to see is a modification for the law on Geelong Road to allow the trucks to pass, but not travel in the outside lane, just to ensure that when there is a problem, the trucks can get around. But we're still fighting that one. Growing issues within our industry. We have the infrastructure priorities where it's great that this government's taken on infrastructure as a major platform rather than health and education as it has in the past. However, we actually need to bring some of these projects to completion as well. It's great to see the rail crossings moving along quickly, but there's more to be done. Toll roads are going to become they're fashionable now, but there's going to be more of them. So tolls are going to be a major issue for us because trucks are currently tolled at, I think a car's around about $8 or $9, a truck's about $35, if not more. It's really about intermodal connectivity. We've got a thing called the Western Industrial Freight Hub being built out past Truganina. I'd like it to see further out towards Ballarat, and there'll be another one called the Beveridge Industrial Freight Terminal built up near Somerton, and there again, and Salter. Sam Tarasco is building one out near Lyndhurst as well. So we're going to have these industrial satellite transport hubs, these intermodal hubs around Melbourne, and they're being developed at the moment. People are holding back on some of their decisions because the government can't make up its mind exactly how it wants to do it. So that'll be interesting. I spoke a little bit before about chain of responsibility, electronic work diaries. Technology in our industry is just fantastic. It really is tremendous. There's over 50 aftermarket safety processes you can put into your truck on the market today. It's just tremendous, the technology that's there now. To the point where there's a system that will actually measure the eyeball flutter of the driver to see how tired he is, and if his eyes go off the road for more than 10 seconds, it actually starts to shake the seat to wake him up because the machine thinks he's asleep, even though he may be looking at something else, which may be a phone, which in our eyes is the greatest threat to road safety we have at the moment, is the telephone, the mobile phone. Distraction is the thing that's creating the most amount of confusion, bad habits, poor decision making, and accidents on our roads. It's the poor decision making of a driver that actually leads to an accident. It's very rare that a wheel falls off or something happens mechanically to a car to create an accident. It isn't as often as what it is with distraction. I drive around in a high car. It's almost like a truck, and I can see down into other people's cars as I drive past them, and I'm just amazed at the amount of people that are using their phones as they drive. I drive along Beach Road every morning, and I see 10% of the drivers, 5 to 10%, on their phones. It's just atrocious. It's sort of behaviour we've got to try and stop. I talked a little bit about the heavy vehicle national law. We also have a national heavy vehicle regulator, and they're the enforcement arm of that law, of the heavy vehicle national law. So they're out on the road pulling over trucks wherever they can. They used to be owned by Vic Roads, but not anymore. I talked a bit before about the perception of the industry with the public. The industry, what we're trying to do with the industry is professionalise it. So we want to see greater qualification in drivers, and not be reliant on those drivers that come to us with no understanding of our road laws. So we have a number of issues with the heavy vehicle licensing system. If you want to get the license today, is your basic qualification for getting behind the wheel of a truck and being a professional truck driver. And unfortunately, the status of that driver who may have just got his license is the same as a fellow who's just about to retire after driving a truck for 40 years. We have no level of recognition of the skill and the knowledge and the experience a person has driving a truck over a long period of time as against somebody who hasn't. And that's a sad indictment of the industry, and one of the things the VTA is working really hard to try and change. So the heavy vehicle licensing system at the moment, it takes about 4 to 5 hours and $1,000 to get a heavy vehicle license at the lowest level. And there again, you can't, basically you've got to wait until you're about 20 anyway, 19, 20, 21, before you can get a rigid license, and then it takes a year. You've got to wait a year before you can go to the next level, and then you've got to wait a year before you can go to the next level. And in that time between those testing regimes, you may never have driven a truck, but that doesn't matter because they'll give you a license because you paid the money. And that's the nature of the industry, the franchise licensing process that we have at the moment. And what we're trying to do, we've been running a program at the VTA, sponsored by the government, where we train people behind the wheel in a structured program with 152 units, ASQA type units, to drive a truck properly. 8 days of experience behind the wheel plus classroom. And then we make them job ready. So we've got our members taking on these drivers directly from us because they are now job ready. Unfortunately, the only other people that are available in the industry are people that have come to us from other countries that have been able to tick a box. They've been able to go for a car license. You can go for a car license in 14 different languages. So you don't have to speak English. You can go for it in 14 different languages. And once you get that license, you can tick a form to gain an exemption to drive a heavy vehicle on the basis that you've written in English, somebody's written in English that you have driven a truck in your home country. So we then allow people to drive heavy vehicles in our roads who aren't necessarily trained, don't necessarily speak the language. I still don't know what keep left and last overtaking looks like in English time. But, and I'm not trying to be racist. What I'm saying is that we need to understand that we have to teach people how to drive a truck before they get behind the wheel of a truck. We don't want them just getting a license like they can get a car license and just say, well, I'm going to go out and earn a living. It's not. We don't see that as being the way forward for the industry or the community, because it is not providing the element of safety that's required. Any truck in an accident is a big accident, just by the pure physics of it. And poor decision making, bad decision making leads to those accidents. And we don't want these people behind the wheel of a truck having accidents. So we're working harder with this program. It's an 8-day program. We're trying to get it introduced as the new standard for driver licensing, heavy vehicle licensing. And guess what? Guess who's putting up the barriers and making it harder and harder? And that's Vic Roads. The institutionalised bureaucracy, which is here to help us all, has decided that it's not their idea, so they don't want it to progress. So, but we're still working hard on it. We'll keep pushing for it. So I just thought I'd throw that slide in. That's yesterday's solution. That's Station Pier. That's loading freight directly off a ship onto the rail, and away it goes. That's what intermodal connectivity is about. That's about productivity and how the industry can better serve the community upon which it operates. So with that, if I can get my mouse working, I'll stop sharing there, Simon.
There you go.
But, I'd love to answer any questions anybody might have.
Thanks, Peter, so much. It's a fascinating topic, and everybody's clapping their hands behind there in appreciation of your talk. Yep. This is one of the silly difficulties of having a Zoom, is that we can't acknowledge people as we'd like to in the fullness of the people that are present. But that's just a wonderful overview of the problems that you face every day, and some of those ratios to see that the heavy vehicle traffic is less than 10% of the total traffic really puts things in perspective a bit. And the plan for general development, as I said earlier, back in 1928, we'll have to go back and Google that again. Can you just describe again the hold up that they're facing with the grain at the moment from Western District farmers? Is it the Geelong port that's where the blockage is?
Yes, well, GrainCorp operate a lot of the loading facilities, and there's a couple of them in there, but they put in time slots for trucks, and of course the trucks started rolling up their time slots, and they couldn't unload them at the same speed as what they made the time slot. So we had trucks sitting in, we'll still have trucks sitting in queues up to 50 long, but trucks are realising it's going to take a long time for them to be unloaded, and they're parking in the local streets, and the council's coming around fining them for illegal parking.
Yeah.
These guys are in their trucks for over 10 hours waiting to get unloaded. It's 10 hours away from their family. It's 10 hours away from doing a second load. That's for the day. I mean, there's all sorts of issues associated with delays in a supply chain like this.
Yeah.
And it's a huge supply chain. And unfortunately, it had a good structure with the rail, but with the Murray Basin Rail Project, which has failed to deliver on its promises, it means that with a bumpy year, it's exacerbated the issues.
I'll ask people if they wish to ask a question, if they could please wave a hand, and I'll pass over to Jeff Bransbury to unmute, or you can unmute yourself. Yes, Chris Rennick, you go, Chris.
Peter, what's the future, or is there a future for autonomous trucks in Victoria? By autonomous trucks, I mean driverless trucks.
Look, it's interesting. Trucks. Chris, not in your grandchildren's time will you see the introduction of autonomous trucks as the normal means of operation. Doesn't mean that we don't have the technology. It's there. We have the ability to be able to do it. It's there. But we can't even get traffic light sensors working properly, so we can get through traffic. We're doing a test with Vic Roads at the moment down Greens Road and Dandenong with a thing called what we call the Green Wave, and those trucks are fitted with an app that actually transmits a signal to the lighting system, and as the truck starts to come close to that light, the light, instead of changing red, stays green. So there's a flow of traffic for the heavy vehicle. Because when the heavy vehicle stops, it takes longer to get going, it holds more traffic up, etc., etc. But there again, if there's no trucks, just let the traffic flow normally. So, but the issue there is the fact that we've had this technology for 15 years, and we're only just trialing it now. When you start to apply the technology that's required for an autonomous vehicle to travel down a road, it's just not there. We don't have the capacity to be able to ensure that these trucks won't wander off their path. All right, so I mean, I get it down the freeways. You like your cat's eyes in the middle of the road, you can put the sensors and the vehicle will sense the reflection of reflection of its own signal off these cat's eyes, which is fine. It'll stay in the lane, and it'll have anti-collision braking, and it'll ensure that a driver could sit there or nobody could sit there and the truck will just travel. But at some stage, you're going to need physical intervention because not every road will have this type of control. And we're just such a long way away from autonomous vehicles being a normal part of what we do, because you'll always need a driver in the truck for a long, long time. Doesn't say it will never come about, but I think it's a long way away, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. We got any other questions there, gents? Wave a hand.
Keith
And
Ross.
Jeff will-
Keith Ross. Kate, can you unmute? No,
Keith Ross, can you unmute?
I'm working hard at it. Thank you very much. Really, Peter, I mean, it's frightening what you talk about the ports, particularly Port of Melbourne, but then if you throw in Geelong, you throw in Hastings, there seems to be no real solution of how to get goods to and from the thing. When do you think common sense will prevail and they'll eventually nominate somewhere that is going to be the future port?
Well, that's why I put up all those plans, Keith.
Yeah.
Is that we've had some good people do some good studies.
There's a brick wall somewhere, but isn't there?
Rodney Eddington is a brilliant man, absolutely brilliant. Did a great job, and really balanced. He came out with a really balanced plan, and we've had another group go through Canberra at the moment. We've got a national the supply chain strategy group. Morris James from Cubes on that. Some good, smart people, but the bureaucrats refuse to accept change. It's just amazing. It is just amazing. For example, we've put the Port of Melbourne is now a commercial entity. So it's not owned by the government anymore. It's a commercial entity owned by equity groups, and they are there to make a margin. They are not there for the goodness of mankind. Their object is to ensure that they remain sustainable, viable, and profitable. And by doing so, by setting that foundation, it means that we want the Port of Melbourne to actually be profitable. But we've got all these impediments. They want to put all the containers up at Webb Dock and take them away from Swanson Dock, which means we'd have to move the cars and the car carrying. But are they willing to lose the revenue that they get from the car carrying if we move the car carriers down to Hastings, which is surrounded by 2,500 acres that we could put blue chip on and drones and park the cars there, have all the car ships come into Hastings, which is about 3 to 5 a week, by the way. We move about 10,000 cars in Victoria a week. So we put all our cars down at Hastings. It'd be a fantastic area. It'd be low impact on the local environment, and it would service that port really well. The but then we could move all our container work into web dock. But then we'd have to create a rail process to move it because the trucks would just be then continuous. If you think about the traffic on the road now, they're saying that we will have twice as much traffic on the road by 2050. Twice as much. I can't see that happening on the freeways. They'll just be be blocked for 12 hours at a time. So Keith, it comes down to when are they going to wake up? I don't know. When people yell loud enough. I don't know.
Thanks, Keith.
Thank you.
I think we've got Roger Wilson's next. Roger, you need to unmute yourself, Roger.
Thank you very much, Peter, for a wonderful presentation.
you,
It's just going back to the start when you had 979,000 trucks there.
Yep.
Does that include removal trucks? Does it include all the rental trucks that are on the road? That's the first question. Second question is, how many of those trucks does Lindsay Fox own through Linfox of the 979,000?
Yeah.
And thirdly, why can't we put more of the containers on rail?
Okay. First of all, with the budget trucks, they're basically driven with a car license, so they're less than 4.5 ton gross vehicle mass, and they're
Right.
part of the commercial vehicle numbers, which is 6 times that of the normal heavy vehicle numbers. So, and there again, the 958,000 is probably around about 1.1 million now. So it's grown a little bit from when we first did those figures. The second part, Lindsay's got about 5,000 trucks out of the million. All right, so Lindsay's got a good network. He's got a great system. He's got a big business. But that's the nature of the business. There's over 40 different sectors of the industry. And what I mean by sectors is it's definitive by the type of freight. A concrete truck doesn't carry cement. A milk tanker doesn't carry fuel. All these, and they're all different trucks. There are hundreds of different combinations of trucks that we have on the road. A concrete agitator is different than a general freight truck. And there again, we get ones with side loaders and different attachments and hydraulic tailgates and things like that all have specific purpose. So it's not as if we can interchange the trucks with an articulated truck. We can move the prime movers around a bit, but even then, some prime movers are better suited to work than others. The 320 horsepower motor is different than a 500 horsepower motor truck in terms of what they can do and how they go about it.
Yeah.
And what was the last part, Rog? What was the
third question?
How many more containers can be put on the rail instead of on the road?
And that was my point towards the end. It's about intermodal connectivity and how that intermodal connectivity then works. The rail industry actually needs to wake up. They need to actually invest in how they can better transition freight from road to rail. And we need to rely on rail as our major line haul medium. We need more freight on rail. I keep telling the trucking guys, more freight on rail, more freight on road. Don't ever be afraid of rail. We want more freight on rail. And we want more emphasis on management of the last mile process in the community itself.
Thank you.
Thanks, Roger.
Thanks, Roger. Next question, gents.
Alan Trumbull.
Yes, Alan.
Thanks, Peter. Very, very interesting. Going back many years when I was involved in using the industry, it was a bit of a home for cowboys. Now, you have put forward that you need better staff, better training, and so forth. Is there evidence that that is happening, or is the cowboy attitude, get the lowest price, still prevalent?
And look, you're spot on there, Alan. The issue we have, my truck isn't any bigger or travel any faster than your truck. So why does a customer use my service against yours?
Yeah.
And now if I can't create a differential in the products that I've got in the market, within my market with what I do, if I can't create that differential, the only other avenue I've got is price. And the only variable in my business to decrease price is labour. My fuel won't cost any less. My truck won't cost any less. The only way I can reduce my costs in my business is labour. So how do I pay somebody less than what you pay somebody? And that then becomes my differential in the market. And that's what drives poor behaviour in the industry, because I can't afford a whole lot of other things. So we're desperately trying to work with federal government. We've got a group of cohort of senators we're working with to try and create a thing called minimum standards in our industry. So it's not about price setting. It's about saying, no, you can't go below these prices. And we've got in Victoria, you might want to write this down. We've got an Owner Drivers and Forestry Contractors Act. The Owner Drivers and Forestry Contractors Act, and in that, actually Phil's not with us. Phil Lovell is the chairman of the Transport Industry Council in Victoria. And one of the major points on our agenda is to keep reviewing those cost models to ensure that we have a minimum standard of cost that is publicly displayed for the industry to follow. And then that will stop that element of people continually competing on price and continually beating up their employees and contractors and trying to screw the living daylights out of them so they make no money at all. And then that will eliminate that on that other sector about the cowboys, which I hate using that. As a child, I used to love cowboys. John Wayne was one of my favourite actors. But the real issue there for me is the fact that that's not the image of the industry that we think prevails, and it's not the way the drivers see themselves. Sure, there's an element of people that are recalcitrants. We get that everywhere. But generally speaking, most truck drivers sleep in their own beds every night with their partners, and they don't travel aimlessly around the highways of Australia not knowing where the next job is. It's not like that.
Good, thank you.
Good.
Thanks, Alan.
Norm Griffiths. Have you got yourself unmuted, Norm?
Yes, manager. Thanks for the talk. That's a very interesting subject you picked up there. You crossed over a lot of lines of inquiry that I had. But one of the earlier things you mentioned, just briefly, was to do with electricity taking over from normal fuels. And do you see a time in the future when, or how far away is it, before we have trucks powered by electricity running on our roads?
Okay. So Norman, please, anything I say is backed by nothing more than what I see as logic. You can see it as the world according to Peter, but I try to make it as logical and as balanced as I can in terms of we've got electric vehicles now. In fact, I've got a photo here of 2 weeks ago with Peter Fox shaking hands with Scott Morrison with Lynn Fox's first electric semi-trailer. So we've had electric local vehicles running around for over 10 years. So TNT, Cole had about 10 of them in Sydney. TNT had about 10 of them down here in Melbourne for a while. But the nature of the supply is what encumbered them in terms of development, in terms of implementation and developing them further into their fleets. And that is the restriction of electricity in terms of it takes payload. The batteries take payload away from the truck. So the longer you want the truck to operate without repowering, the more batteries you have to have in the truck itself. And then taking the weight of the batteries take away the value of the freight. So then I have to sell my services at a higher rate. Oh, we're back into Alan's area there with, hang on a sec, we're just competing on price, aren't we? So what, and it's not about subsidies. We shouldn't be looking to be supported artificially. We should be able to ensure that normal market forces deliver a sustainable industry, not one that's supported by government money, whether it be state or federal. So Norman, in terms of electric vehicles, they're here, they're around. But are they something the industry will take up and introduce into their fleets overnight? Absolutely not. The company that I was with, I was director of, at Border Express. Biofuels was the talk of the day. We were going to get diesel made up of boiled down animal bones. So we bought into a biodiesel plant in Albury, which was connected to the abattoirs there, and we started supplementing diesel with biodiesel. We were getting a 6 cent a litre subsidy from the government to do so. So we thought, well, okay, the numbers stack up for us to be able to do this. We could drive a truck from a B-double from Albury to Sydney, but we'd have to refuel with normal diesel because we couldn't buy biodiesel in Sydney at the time. So we put that on trial on about 4 of our B-doubles running up and back. And it wasn't going too bad. We had to do modifications to motors and we had to check them regularly and do different things. But then the government decided to lift the 6% tariff variance and put the biodiesel at the same cost as normal diesel. It was a simple logistical decision to stop doing biodiesel. Why would you want to do it if there's no economic return? There's no commercial return. It all comes down to the commercial reality. I could put 50 safety systems into a truck tomorrow that would make it safer, but unless there's an economic return for me or a mitigation of risk, why would I want to do it? I'm not here for the goodness of mankind. I'm here to ensure that the business remains sustainable. The bank manager isn't going to smile at me just because I said I'm a good citizen. They're going to smile at me because I'm paying them off at the rate I said I would, at the rates that they agreed, that we agreed. So that's the reality of all this. I don't know whether that answers your question, but Norm, but yeah, electric vehicles, there's got to be a stronger business case for them to be adopted the way it is. And I'd hate to think that the only business case we could get was one through subsidy.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Yeah, the facts. Thanks, Norm. It's a nice set. One more question we've got, gents, and then we'll have to close up. Anybody got a question?
My question actually on this subject was the alternative fuels. A few years ago, Australia ran out of diesel just before Christmas.
And it will again too.
We're looking at alternative ones, which are hydrogen and ammonia. Now, I'm just wondering how you see the opportunity of using ammonia or hydrogen as an alternative fuel in the future.
Good. I can't say much about ammonia because I don't know much about ammonia. I don't know how it's derived, except through animals. And so, but hydrogen to me is the future. It is the way we will reduce emissions, still maintain our levels of power to weight ratios, and still be able to remain commercially effective. There's no doubt that fossil fuels will come to an end one day. It's interesting the way it's going. Fuel price hasn't changed in 2.5-3 years for the industry. It's amazing. But the real point here is the fact that we believe hydrogen is the way. We don't believe. I personally don't believe electricity is. You've got to. How do we make electricity now? We burn coal. So it's just a facade in that context. Keeping in mind, I read an interesting article the other day. We need to be able to meet a zero carbon footprint for power production by the year 2050, as per our Paris Accord agreement. We would have to be able to decrease our reliance on combustion fuel electricity by 2.8 gigameters a day for the next 10,500 days. Every day. So I mean, it's equivalent of 3,000 wind farms. Sorry, wind towers a day. It's equivalent of the 250 square kilometres of solar cells a day, every day. So our demand for electricity is huge, and we don't seem to quite understand how to reduce our demand for electricity. It's certainly not a theme of the local government. If we're going to rely on alternate fuels for electricity, then we need to understand that we better manage our usage of electricity. Yeah. I don't understand. I mean, I can remember driving on Beach Road back in the 60s, and at 10 o'clock at night, the lights would go out on Beach Road. I don't know whether you remember that, the people that live around here. I grew up in Beaumaris, so, and what I'm saying to you there is that the lights used to go out because we didn't have the power. We didn't have all the big power stations that we've got now down at your lawn, but we still, you fly into Melbourne and there's every street light on in every street. It shouldn't be. There should be some sort of discipline that says, hang on, down this graded street, A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3, or yellow, red, yellow, green, grade the streets and turn them off at certain times. I don't think that we've got a cohort of muggers waiting for people in the shadows to attack everybody. We've got this false sense of security where we want one thing, but we don't want to sacrifice the other. So
Yeah.
Alternate fuels are the future, no doubt about it. But I think it's hydrogen for our
Thanks,
industry.
Peter.
For our industry, not for everybody. Electricity be for cars. Thank you very much. Please take the opportunity to give me a call now that we all know each other. Please, at any time at all, if you'd like to have a chat about something, if you'd like to raise an issue, if you'd like some more information, if you'd like me to talk some more than happy. So, I really welcome the opportunity to be able to get out in front of you, and I thank you very much for your time and your attention. Thank you very much.